All right, it's 3:05 on the dot. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started because we have a lot of good info to share today. So welcome to the Women in Housing Network Connections. And so today we're going to be talking about women in facilities and operations. And so we have a dynamic discussion today focused on the experiences of women in facilities. So I'm ready to listen. I'm ready to learn. Feel free to hop in the chat so we can gain some insight on professional development opportunities as well. So I will allow my panelists to quickly introduce themselves. So I'll go first. My name is Paige Hicks. I serve as the co-chair for the Women in Housing Network, and I'll be moderating our session today. I'm at the University of South Florida, and I'm a residence life coordinator.
Hi, folks. I'm Ashley Wendler. I'm the Director of Housing Operations at SMU, Southern Methodist University.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Pelton. I'm the Assistant Director for Facilities and Risk Management at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas.
Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Frederick. I currently serve as the Associate Director for Facilities Management at Missouri State University.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to learn a lot from you all today. I'll also be joined by Deanna Hughes. She is our co-chair elect coming in, and so she'll join us a little bit later today. All right, before we hop into all of our good info and story time sharing and info resource sharing, I'm going to give a couple of quick updates. And so if you haven't heard by now, Kuwai has a podcast, and so you can stream the first podcast that's out there. It's really good, and I can't wait to listen to it this weekend. So you can find that on all platforms. And then because we love professional development and some offerings that Akuai has for us in April, there's a Mid-Level Leadership Institute. It's April 6th through 9th. It's virtual, so please log on and learn more and learn how to sign up. And then we also have our Live-In Symposium on the 28th of April and our Small College and University Symposium. Those are great spaces to really learn more and dive deep into the work and understand how we can support each other and other professionals and students at our campus. And then last but not least, please join us for our Ukuai Conference and Expo. It's June 22nd to the 24th. I hope that I'm able to see a lot of you in that space, but please register by April 6th for an early discount. So they do have some team passes available, so log on to the Ukuai website to learn more. And then last, but certainly not least, we have the Akuai online community. And so there's a lot of resources available for you there. You can post questions, reach out to folks, and even read articles to just help inform your practice. So that's another resource that's available to everyone here. And then you can also go onto YouTube. We have our recordings there. So this session is being recorded. So you can always go back, and if you missed something or want to share it with a colleague, you can share that link with someone. All right, and so just a few housekeeping notes. This is a conversation today, and so it's not a traditional webinar. We have a couple of questions that we've shared with our panelists, but also some questions that have been submitted by folks who are women in housing across the nation. And so this is an opportunity to connect and be a part of the session. So if possible, if you could have your webcam on to help us engage with one another, that'd be great. And then questions and comments can also be shared in the chat function. And so we'll take questions as we get them and we'll post them to our panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to spend some time asking some of our panelists questions. And so our first one that I want to get us started with is tell us about your journey. At what point did you realize that you were passionate about your work in facilities or in operations? And so Ashley, do you want to get us started with that one?
Sure. Hi, folks. I mentioned I'm at Southern Methodist University. I'm the Director of Housing Operations there, but I started in residence life about 15 years ago, and I was in 3 live-on positions at 3 different institutions. And towards the end of that, someone said, hey, maybe give this a shot. I mean, it really was that sort of innocent and easy in that sense. I will point out that I think that they said, hey, maybe try housing operations, simply because of some committee selections I had been on. I had been overseeing move-in and move-out activities on a campus that had a lot of move-in and move-out activities on the res life side, and had been working with housing operations counterparts. Admittedly, I was at Portland State at the time, and Portland State was going through a rebuilding process. And we're really looking for folks who had seen housing and residence life at other institutions. And at that point, I'd been a few places. And so I think that they thought I had a sense of maybe what it was supposed to look like. And so it was as simple as that, is that I was in a live-on role until suddenly I was offered something else and I wasn't. And it could have worked. It worked out great for me. You know, at the time, I don't know if I knew that it would, but it did. And I will say that I think that it worked out really well for me, because I was actually using a lot of what I had learned in residence life about what students needed and what they expected, and had that background. So that was really helpful, but then spent a few years learning a whole lot about things I didn't know much about. I was at the time of my life that I just had time to do that I was probably working more than 40 hours a week on a really regular basis. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then from there, I worked really, really hard for a few years and learned it, and then realized that I could do it in 40 hours a week, and that I really liked that part of it. And that it's a job that generally, like outside of like fires and floods, you know, I get to go home at 5 o'clock every day, and I really like that. There's a picture up with me and my child. I clearly like haven't invested a ton in like professional headshots or time along those lines, but I have a family, and I like the balance. So that's one of the big reasons that keeps me in operations. The other part of it that I think that I really, really like is that I still get to support the work that I did believe in residence life, right? Like I started there because I liked it and enjoyed it. And I actually didn't run away from residence life. But it's really nice to know that I have a great work-life balance, but also I'm supporting people doing that work still. And then like side note, like small chuckle for me is that no one cries in my office. And I also really love that about my job, right? It wasn't always that way, but I don't have students crying in my office. And so like, that is just better for me professionally, and probably where my skill set is at. So that's a little bit about how I ended up here. Like I said, started in residence life. So, and I will turn it back over to Paige.
Thank you. I love learning about that. 40 hours a week. Wow. I love to hear that. Teresa, would you like to go next?
I sure can. And it's fun to hear other folks' stories. And Ashley, there's a lot of parallels between our paths, and that's real fun to see and to hear. Like a lot of folks, my journey in housing and facilities really wasn't planned. I happened to find myself in a work environment where I felt competent and valued, and I enjoyed the work, and things kind of evolved for me over the years. After graduate school, I took a hall director position at Missouri State. And from the beginning, I really appreciated my experience here because I was getting good firsthand experience in all three areas of our housing program: business services, facilities and operations, and of course, education and development. And I remember from the beginning being really jazzed about the facilities trainings. And I'm not sure if it was because it was different than all those feeling pieces, because sometimes the feeling side can be a little bit of a stretch, and it's great, but it's a little bit of a stretch. And so I really loved those sessions, and I loved learning how to do lock changes and that paperwork process, because I could nail that stuff, right? And so I really gravitated towards those things. I really enjoyed the students and the staff, and so I still liked that part, but I really did find myself enjoying those facility things. I did not have a 5 or a 10-year plan, honestly. My goal as a hall director was to master that position. And so each spring, as it came time for us to talk about what our intentions were for the upcoming year, so folks could handle recruitment, it was just like, I'm going to try again next year. I can do it. I will master this. But along the way, some things happened within our department that ended up providing an opening in the facilities area. Our assistant director had taken another position, and so the coordinator in that area kind of stepped into an acting role, and I was tapped to help for that summer in transition one thing led to another. And that fall, I was allowed to work part-time in the coordinator role and then also continue to be a hall director. And so that was a difficult year to basically have two positions, but it was a fantastic opportunity. From there, I was able to move into that coordinator role full-time. That position very much spent a lot of time connecting with hall staff in the buildings about facility-related things. I handled all the training related to lock changes and fire panels and building walkthroughs and things of that nature, but I also handled programmatic pieces for the facilities office. And so I still got to take a lot of that education and development piece with me. From there, with some additional staffing changes, I ended up moving into the assistant director role a few years later. Within that same area, there was a restructure again, and I moved into an associate director role for facilities within housing. Very similar to my assistant director role, with some additional budget pieces and projects being released to me to manage in a different way. And now currently I am the associate director for facilities management at Missouri State. So I'm the second to the director in that role. And then I oversee business services for our unit. And that is me. And sorry for taking so long.
No, that was good. I learned a lot in the power of folks just also sharing opportunities and saying, hey, are you interested in this? I really love that there are folks around you that were able to leverage your skill set. Last but not least, Katie.
Thank you, Ms. Paige. So very similar to Ashley and Teresa, I was brought up on the res ed side of things. So I always like to tell people I was raised in res ed. So understand the programmatic and the feeling piece of the department. But I knew that inherently my skill set and my preference was very much for the process, the procedure, the task-oriented components of the job. One of my favorite parts of my time in the residential education area was summer camps and conferences, because it was all about turns and cleaning and walkthroughs and keys, and very much a check-in and a check-out, and very process, did we complete the task or not? And so I never really considered a opportunity in facilities as a viable pathway for my career. It's just not something that was ever presented in the sense of in graduate school as an opportunity. Not something I'd ever considered. I always thought, for operations, you'd have to be more on the business side, and for facilities, you'd have to be a technician. So I stayed in res ed for quite some time, and I'm very grateful for that, because that allowed me to develop the skill set of being able to, what I call, people all the time. And to take some of those skill sets of documentation and conflict management with me through my career. It got to a point where I decided that I was in my current, not my current position, but a previous position, I felt I was maxed out. And I decided I'm going to start looking. And the universe heard me, and the universe somehow magically created a reorganization in our department, and a facilities position within our housing office opened up, because at that time, our facilities group reported to the executive director of housing. And so I went ahead and took that leap, and I did have to go through an application process, which was scary because I had not done that in quite some time. I spent 3 years in our facilities maintenance area proper, and then we had another reorg. About the time the universe heard me again say, I don't know what else I can contribute here. There was another university-wide reorg. And so I'm back in residence life, but I still work with our facilities group in almost the exact same way that I did, working with all their training, the Cleary, the fire piece, the custodial supervision, and camps and conferences, and a myriad of other things. So that's where I'm at now.
Thank you for sharing. It sounds like you've definitely been able to touch a lot of pieces and see a lot of things just because of your journey. And so I think the next question is just very fitting, and maybe you can kick us off with it. What trends are you noticing within facilities and operations?
So some of the things that I'm noticing is that we, in facilities and operations are maybe starting to take a more holistic perspective of our jobs versus a siloed perspective. And I think that we've always done a good job of connecting the pieces, but I do think that currently staff in operations and facilities are really taking a much more vested interest in trying to understand what the other side or the other unit is doing and how all of those pieces connect. That your piece may be letters M through R, but there is a whole alphabet around you that has the process as well. And we're not just individuals doing a job, but we're all working together as one department or one university to make sure a job gets done and our students are served. I know that in a lot of our regional aspect, because I am involved with our regional housing organization as well. A lot of us are taking a focus on preventative maintenance versus reactive maintenance. And not just an air filter change or a walkthrough, but serious preventative maintenance programs based on manufacturer recommendation, install recommendations to make sure that equipment is up and running, that furniture and finishes are taken care of in a proper way so that we can be more proactive about taking care of our areas. And then also in the operations side, really focusing on trying to integrate technology in a way that is meaningful and beneficial, not just integrating technology for technology's sake. And so I will turn it over to either Teresa or Ashley, because I'm sure they've got some great things to contribute as well.
I think the other thing that I think we're seeing in terms of trends is students' expectations of our online portals and keeping up with that from compared to at least a decade ago, students have full expectations that the Housing Residence Life website is going to function the same way that the Amazon website functions. And as you can imagine, we are not staffed behind the scenes in the same way. And so that they can complete every transaction online. And even when I think that we're getting there, that all the transactions are online, the students want to be able to go backwards and forwards and change their mind maybe 3 times before they land on a final answer. And we're definitely not there. I don't think most institutions are there in terms of that kind of an online system that can manage data in such a way. And so really trying to figure out how to be intentional about processes so that we can be as efficient with our kind of online time as possible is something that I think we've been thinking about for a while and are continuing it to work on.
I think one thing, a trend that we are seeing for us is related to our staffing. We are finding that our workforce is maturing and diminishing for various reasons. And so we've had a lot of retirements. But in addition to that, we've got a lot of folks who are working through some FMLA situations and all of those things culminating in reduced labor hours for us. However, continued expectations in the workload is not changing. So that's a trend for us. And there's also the concern of losing some of that knowledge that we have as our staff transition. And then specifically within our staffing, we're also challenged to fill our trades positions. The competition for employees with that skill set it is pretty fierce. And so that is a concern for us and a trend that we're not only seeing on our campus, but within our community and colleagues across our state are having the same challenge. I would echo what Katie and Ashley have already shared. I would say for us also is just space utilization and flexibility is really key. So as we are working through projects and supporting and providing spaces for students, those being really intentional in how we're using space, but being able to pivot and change as folks need is also a trend that is not new, but I think is continuing for us.
You're muted, Paige.
That happens once every session. Well, happy Zoom meeting. But I really love that you mentioned pivoting, right? And so that's something that we've all had to learn, had to do during this time. And something else that you mentioned was learning of learning what your partners, especially like in residential life and education, like what they need and how you can best support them. And so, Teresa, maybe I can go ahead and start with you. How can your partners in residence education and life best support you in the work that you all are doing?
Well, Paige, I think that question in itself is what folks can do. The fact that there is an interest and a concern is really meaningful, and that's going to help us in our teamwork both directions. And so I would say showing a value for the work of that the staff members complete and for them as people, and allow your words and your actions to align with that value. Sometimes we can say those things, but if we can then show it as well, I think that's really meaningful. In my experience, I've seen a marked difference in when an RA or a hall director supervisor values facilities and shows that value. There's a complete difference in how that person approaches their work and their engagement with our team members. And so if that can be something that you can instill with team members, that makes a huge difference. And it's great for our team because then they feel valued, and it makes it that much better to be at work when you know that what you do is important and noticed by others. And I think that's that's a top-down thing. I was real fortunate to work in a department where our director had been an assistant director for a facility, so it's kind of an expectation. And so that would be one piece that I would share. And not everything is for each of us. I'm not super jazzed about certain pieces on the feeling side, but I still want to understand what you're doing so I can support you so we can be a good team.
I like that. Thank you so much. And I'm taking a lot of notes over here about that. Ashley or Katie, is there anything that you want to add or echo in this space around some of the things Teresa has shared?
I will add something that I think it took me a good 5 or 7 years to really figure out with my residence life counterpart at the time. And that is that it's not a competition. That maybe it's just that we were young at the time. It wasn't always like that for us. But when we figured that out, everyone was happier at work, right? That residence life and housing operations, we weren't competing, and we weren't even competing for resources, right? That usually if residence life got the resources, housing operations was still going to benefit in some way, or facilities was still going to benefit in some way. And that we had to see it as a win-win. And life got better. And one of the really tangible ways that we did that is that almost always me and my residence life counterpart talked about something or talked about a problem before we presented it to the executive director, right? It was just that touch base, didn't want to step on her toes, didn't want to doubt, because rarely is there a well-defined line of this is exactly operations or this is exactly residence life, right? But even if I knew she wasn't going to like what I was doing, if I told her first, it helped with the buy-in. It just made everything easier. And so when we stopped seeing it as competition, that went further than anything probably in my career.
So I would echo everything that has been said. I do think that those staff members that take the time to build relationships with your operations and facilities folks, because I think relationships are key to a lot of the work that we do, makes it a lot easier for you to do your job and then to be able to ask questions. So I would always encourage Res Ed to ask questions if you don't quite understand something. And that may just be what is a technical term mean, or explain jargon to me, just because sometimes that translation of a facilities language to a Res Ed language, it doesn't always compute, right? So sometimes we speak in very different languages. And then I'm a firm believer in holistic learning. I would encourage, just like I referenced earlier, the alphabet, that you know what your process is A to Z, so that you understand what their part is and what your part is. And like Ashley said, it's not a competition. We just all have a part to play.
Thank you all for sharing those invaluable gems. It is a pleasure to be in this space with you all. This is Deanna C. Hughes speaking. Got the kiddos in the house with me, so excuse the lovely noise of Lion King 2 or random questions. But Katie, I love how you talked about how most times it's an issue of not necessarily even an issue, but a reality of you know what you do, you understand the language, as well as learning how to communicate that to other colleagues and peers. So I wanted to ask you a question about skill. I know sometimes understanding what you do and then learning how to compute that to others who are trying to figure out is in and of itself a skill. So whoever wants to take on this question first, what is one skill that you have developed in your career journey that you were not expecting in this role?
I can start. I know a lot more about plumbing than I ever thought I would know about plumbing, right? But plumbing impacts all the areas, because if something goes wrong with plumbing, we're talking about relocating students, we're talking about major damage to their belongings, right? So I think if you're thinking like, I need to learn a little bit about something in facilities, talk to your plumber, because they control a lot there. But the other thing that I developed a lot of skill around is IT work. And on the residence life side, I didn't see that coming. StarRes kind of worked. I just dabbled in what I needed to know. And I learned it. And I do think that, unfortunately, like one of the things about learning software and IT is that it takes a ton of time, that it doesn't come naturally, even if it comes naturally, I think like sort of understanding there's deep nuances there when you're working with software, and a lot of us are working with StarRes. And so that is something that I learned, but it's been really, really useful in multiple roles to understand how the data structure is set up.
Thank you.
For me, I think it was to learn to talk in sound bites with our technicians. So they were always on the go. They need concise information, not a story. If they want the story, they'll ask for it. And I like to tell stories. I'm pretty imaginative at times. And so I had to really know my audience and dial back the information provided. Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate what both Ashley and Katie shared. I'm going to go a different route in how I took this question. And so when I made the switch to facilities, I thought it was going to be tasky and things and check boxes, but it wasn't always that. I did more roommate conflict mediation in facilities than I ever thought I would. And so that's where I kind of took this question. So roommate conflicts continue, they just look different. And so it's not, in the 6-person suites that I was used to dealing with. Instead, it's the plumber who left a mess for custodial, or the day shift custodian who's frustrated with the second shift custodian and how they handled the vacuum, or the painter who's frustrated that the RA didn't take down their wall decorations so that they could do what they wanted to do. And so those skills that we learned with mediation in our res ed side, I continued to use them a lot more than I really wanted to, but that's okay. I'm glad I had them. And so that was one piece that I wasn't expecting I would continue to use at the level I did. But it's good.
Thank you for sharing. That is really cool to learn, right? That the things that you all have just taken in other spaces, you're still utilizing them. And also the concise information. I think that's something that I am learning this year as I get to work a little bit more with our partners and facilities. They don't need the beginning and the end. They just need to know the how and the what. What do you need me to fix, Paige, and how did it happen? So good stuff. Our next question was submitted by a Women in Housing member. And so they wanted to ask our panelists, how have you thought strategically about your career development and advancement within facilities and operations? And so I'm excited to learn a little bit more as you all shared your journeys earlier. I hope there's some good nuggets you're able to share with us. And so maybe we could get started with Ashley first.
So something that happened to me when I was in my career is that at some point I realized that I was getting a lot of direct day-to-day facilities experience and working with facilities, but I didn't have any capital projects yet. And so there was a period where I basically just let my supervisor know that I was interested, and then started small on capital projects, like the really not very exciting ones, roof replacements, boiler replacements, that type of thing. And then realized that there was one on the horizon. And admittedly, I shaped the next 3 or 4 years of my career out of doing a big renovation because I knew my resume needed that. Not knowing exactly where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do, that if I wanted to stay in the field, that would give me a leg up. And so I could see it coming. And so one of the reasons that I stayed at Portland State University for 10 years instead of 7 years is to have that experience and to do a big renovation. And so it was great that my supervisor allowed that. A lot of that just worked out, but then making sure that I stuck around for that. So if you see those coming, maybe something to take note of.
I think as far as, I think you've learned probably, I haven't been super strategic. I think my approach has just been, well, that seems interesting and I haven't done it. So, pick me. And so really, that was really what I have chosen to do in my career, is just as I see opportunities that are available, then I am quick to volunteer, and have just, let my supervisors know that if there's anything project related, I'm interested, or areas where I don't have as much experience, expressed an interest. If there's meetings that I can be a part of, or processes that I can see more of, I've had those opportunities. So it's really raising your hand, and just paying attention and getting that invite to the table, for those types of things. I think what's also been key for me is having some mentors that have kind of challenged me in what I'm thinking. And so as a couple of opportunities have been presented to me over the past few years, I had one of my mentors say, right now you're really focused on this decision between these two opportunities, but what I want you to think about is not, what is best for this next step, but what gets you 2 positions down the road where you want to be. And so I usually hadn't thought that far ahead. And so when I made my most recent decision, that's what I made my decision on, is which position was going to get me in a better position for 2 steps down the road. And so that was a great piece, for someone who in general professionally hasn't had a 5 or 10 year plan, but that was really helpful for me to get that challenge.
So similar to Teresa, I'm not super strategic in the sense of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I used to be in my very early professional career until I realized that was very limiting. And so for me, the answer to this question is yes and no. Yes, I've thought strategically in the sense of taking advantage of opportunities as they present themselves, whether it be projects or positions, learning opportunities. So attending an APA conference that was just on a whim, my university was able to send me, and I was very fortunate. But also not limiting myself to thinking only about facilities and operations, but making sure that I stay well-rounded in all areas. Because for me, I'll be very honest that I don't know if I will end my career in facilities and operations. My thought is I may want to take a couple of steps up to maybe a director level, but understanding that, in my opinion, I think a great director would have some experience in all of these areas, and then they have a little bit better understanding of what their staff are doing or are working with, like Teresa mentioned earlier. And so for me, it's really just been about taking opportunities as they come, but I also make sure to follow up with those individuals that I know and ask questions about what they're working on and show interest, because that tends to also be a gateway for being asked to help with projects or sit on committees and have opportunities.
Thank y'all so much. Definitely gems. I love how Ashley opened up and speaking with the reality of, excited for those huge capital projects. However, opportunities to do the small and then shift into the greater opportunities helped me to think about how I wanted to develop in this role. And Teresa was mentioning the importance of mentorship and individuals aiding in your ability to think strategically through. Katie, wrapping it up with the honesty of, hey, I'm loving what I'm doing now, and I'm always giving my 100%. However, I'm also mindful of other opportunities and the beauty of having a well-breathed experience in different areas to be a holistic visionary, to be a holistic leader, to know what I'm talking about when I'm supporting someone, that was in the role that I used to assume. We have another question for you all that comes from another woman who wanted to know what has been some of the most beneficial resources you have found to help enhance your work in facilities and operations. And Katie, if it's okay with you, we'll start with you.
Yes. So for me, and I can put these in the chat, and when I'm done, it's your organizations, your APA. I call it ASHE, ASHE. Hopefully they are okay with me saying that. Our housing software, we use Star Res at CM Houston. So that company has been incredibly beneficial when it comes to training and opportunities and lesson plans. And then also using our corporate partners or exhibitors, vendors as resources, because whether it's keys or security or furniture or flooring, they've got great experience. And why not talk to the expert? And most of the time they'll buy you coffee to talk to them. So those are some of the groups that I use. I have a few more listed, but not wanting to take away from anybody else. I can throw those in the chat when the question is kind of towards the end as well.
Yes, please. And thank you so much for being willing to do that. Teresa?
Yeah, I will jump in. So I would echo what Katie said and encourage folks to utilize association resources. ACUHO partners with APA to provide the fall conference, and that is a great conference. And I've learned so much, and I've connected with some really great folks through that conference who I am in contact with, honestly, probably someone each week, whether it's text or email, like, hey, I'm working on this. Have you done this? Or what are your thoughts on this? Visited folks' campuses as we were doing new builds to see, a new VRF system that we hadn't done. So we went to their campus to see it installed and kind of talk through it. So I would encourage folks to utilize association resources. We do, through the Housing Facility Services Committee, we do sponsor folks participating in the APA Institute. And so that is also a great resource for folks to participate. So APA has this institute, and you go through 4 sessions, and there's different tracks within that. And just a great learning opportunity. It's really in-depth, high caliber presenters, and I would highly encourage if you can. And so there are scholarships available for folks to participate in that, whether it's through ACUHO and their scholarships, but also APA regionally sometimes offers some scholarships for folks to participate in that. And then I think I did mention the Housing Facility Services Committee. That is part of ACUHO-I, and that's really been a great group to connect with. It's similar to Women in Housing, but it's for folks who do facilities for housing. And so we meet monthly and we connect. We have some subcommittees there. And again, I've made such great connections with folks there, folks that are sounding boards, and really just make a difference in the day-to-day, because sometimes we don't have a lot of facility folks on our campus to connect with, or sometimes you want to talk to someone that's not there about some of the things that you're working through. And so just some great association resources that I would make a plug for, and just that networking that comes from it.
I'm not sure I have much to echo. I think that everything I had listed on my list has been stated. So good work, folks.
Good stuff. It looks like Katie's dropped some resources and also some information about some items that they've utilized. And so I want to encourage anyone that has a question to drop it in the chat. Because we are going to ask our last question to the finalists and really turn it over to the folks in this space. And so for our panelists, we like to call this like our pearls of wisdom, right? What advice would you give to a woman trying to advance in facilities and operations? Teresa, can I start with you?
You sure can. So I would say take advantage of any opportunities that are presented. Serve on search committees, attend any meetings that you can get into, even if they're not within your typical scope. It's a place for you to soak in information and get yourself seen. So then you're a familiar face and you're invited more. Network connections matter. I don't think I would be tapped for some of the opportunities that I have been had I not put myself out there. Networking is not natural for me. It is super uncomfortable, but I still do it. And so I would encourage you to stretch in that way if you're like me in that regard. And then one thing I would add, and I'm gonna, I want to be sensitive in my example, but and please know I'm aware. So for me, I think it's important that we're aware of the language that we use for ourselves and for other women. I participated in a roundtable about 4 years ago with Jenny Totten from University of Florida, and she made a statement. She brought this up to think about the words that we typically use to describe women. And a lot of times we say they're kind and they're caring and they're compassionate. That's okay, right? But what words do we typically use to describe men? They're driven, they're task-oriented, they take charge. And we tend to find this really more prevalent perhaps in the facilities area. And so I really, that resonated with me. And so I really challenged myself to be mindful of that as I'm doing performance evaluations or as I'm speaking about staff members and describing them or advocating for them or whatever it might be. I think it's important that we think about the language that we're choosing to use. But along with that, I would want to say it's important to flow with who you are. I am a caring person. And I do sit on the feeling side, even though I don't like to do the feeling side, but that's who I am and that's okay. And so I work better when I can flow with who I am and not feel like I have to be different because I'm in a male dominant field. It's okay. What I bring to the table is valuable and it's important. And I feel better when I'm true to me. So that's what I would say.
So, and it's so interesting that Teresa just said, flow with who you are, because mine was don't compromise yourself. And so, be mindful of yourself, but I know that I am, I'd be a little spunky at times, and sometimes that catches people off guard, and I have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, I'm not going to be typically like your docile, passive person. That's just not me. I would also recommend that, and this is probably with any position, that we listen a little bit more than we speak when we don't know everything that we might want to speak on. And so that's a really great way to learn. And my experience has been that if individuals know you're listening and willing to ask questions, they're willing to share that information. And also, especially if folks are guarded when you come in, maybe as a new employee, they're probably more likely to share if they know that you will be listening and not trying to tell them what they should be doing, or how to do it, if that's appropriate. Putting supervisor situations aside. And then echoing what we've said the entire time we've been together is to educate yourself. Definitely take advantage of your opportunities, and maybe make it a goal that every quarter you find an area where you need to do some more education. And even if it's just reading or a webinar, all of the resources that we gave, you can get a lot of free resources, even from APA. They have a lot of free webinars and free items that you can definitely use to educate yourself.
And I would just say, I think understanding the processes outside of my area has probably served me well. That I don't just know my niche thing, but I know how residence life works. I know how facilities works, and not just at a big level. I understand kind of the nitty gritty and the nuances of what they're going to work through, so that I understand when I pull a lever to do my job, what that's impacting on their area. But I also think that put me in a position for promotions, because I understood the next level of kind of looking at the whole umbrella. So I think that anything you can do to really understand the work that other folks are doing goes a long way.
I had one word that resonated, and it was powerful. I hope that folks that are listening in can attest. I love Pearls of Wisdom, and I appreciate how it just flowed beautifully. I'm starting with Teresa, Katie, as well as Ashley's point. I definitely want to make sure that on behalf of Equalized Women in Housing Network, we made time to thank you all for taking time to share the knowledge and wisdom on your area of expertise, as well as your experience before and during. I noticed that we don't have questions as of yet, but folks, please know you still can drop them in the chat to let us know. At this time, I'm hopeful that those who are listening in also make time to drop in the chat to affirm Ashley, Katie, and Teresa. And we don't mind reading a few out loud, but we are fans of making sure that flowers are provided in real time while we are thriving to the best of our abilities. So please make sure that you put whatever you wish to say that resonates with you. Thanks, kudos. I know the language differs, but words of appreciation to Ashley, Katie, and Teresa for making time to share with us. And we will keep our eyes open on the chat as those points of information flow in.
I definitely learned a lot in this space today, so thank you so much. And I really appreciate, Teresa, you talking about the importance of language as we think about our work and how folks show up and how things are gendered. And even you can look at other intersections as well, just how we describe ourselves and we evaluate ourselves. I think that's a really important nugget. So I appreciate you for that.
Yes, and I'm not sure if y'all are seeing what is coming in, but many thanks to those who made time to share. But I want to make sure that I do read a few aloud, if that is okay with you all. So such talented women on this panel with valuable perspectives. I appreciate you. Thank you, Melinda. From Jennifer, thank you for taking the time to share with us today. Amber also shared, thank you so much. I'm excited to continue looking at my career goals and the direction I want to go after residence life. And then I see some agreements, which is amazing. But I agree with the importance of language and being mindful of that. Thank you for pointing that out. And thank you to everyone for your time today. I know we would be remiss if we also did not plug our next upcoming roundtable, which is currently slated for April 21st. I feel like we're going to blink and the beautiful month of April will be here. So if you do not have anything to do, 1 minute, my love, please make sure that you tune in on April 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Right now, we are looking to allow our amazing individuals that serve in occupancy, management, assignments, enrollment to speak to their experiences and their trajectory. So y'all are the first to hear it, and more details will be forthcoming.
We also have another, I want to say thank you again so much for our panelists today. Definitely walking away with a lot of information. We also have another roundtable to end our Women's History Month. We'll be talking to some folks, and our other co-chair in this space, Melinda, will be moderating that session. We're talking with game changers, women who have really influenced just the field of housing. And so that happens, that webinar will occur at the same time, 3 o'clock next week on the 31st. So please join us, bring a cup of coffee, your flask of water, and I can't wait to learn more from folks in that space. Well, with that, I appreciate you for logging on. Please utilize those resources. Sign up for the early bird registration for Kuawai. Listen to that podcast, and thank you for joining us today.